Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Consultation Specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. With me today is my usual co-host. Actually, no, sorry, I forgot my co-host is not with me today. She's away, but she'll be back next week, I think. And today's topic is the Socioeconomic Study Plan, which is an important piece of work as part of the environmental and impact assessment. So we're going to talk a bit about that to give you an idea of what's involved and what activities we're going to be and are undertaking as part of that study plan. So let's dive in here, and we'll do, as we normally do, a bit of a review of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to provide the usual project background just to get everybody up to the same level in terms of understanding of the project. Then we're going to talk about the objectives of the study plan, valued components and indicators, methods, and then how you can keep the conversation going with us. So let's start with providing a bit of background on the project. The All-Season Road sits in Northern Ontario on Treaty 9 lands. It would connect the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the All-Season Highway network to the south through a connection with the Martin Falls Community Access Road, but it would also connect to the north to the Webequie Supply Road. And just for people that aren't familiar with it, the Ring of Fire is considered to be one of the most promising mineral development opportunities in Ontario, with minerals including but not limited to chromite, cobalt, nickel, copper, and platinum. This project, as with the other two all-season road projects in the area, is subject to both the Environmental Assessment Act and Federal Impact Assessment Act. Interestingly enough, the proponents are Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. This is one of the first major projects in Canada where the First Nations are actually the proponents. Both of these communities, just for your information, sit about 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay in slightly different directions. And they are, of course, currently remote, meaning they can only be accessed by road in a very narrow window during the winter. And to lead up to this project, there have been a number of studies done previously, looking at various corridors to the Ring of Fire. Finally, in 2020, the province of Ontario, Martin Falls First Nation, Webequie First Nation agreed to work together. Both communities agreed voluntarily to conduct and be proponents of an environmental assessment for the project. In terms of the project's interaction with other projects, I know many of the people listening today are aware of these other all-season road projects, and are wondering where they fit in how they fit together and why aren't they all part of one environmental assessment. But these three projects would ultimately be connected to each other, but they were all initiated for different reasons at different times, and each are undergoing. They're all undergoing their own individual environmental assessments or impact assessments. And as I mentioned, when built, all of these roads would connect ultimately Webequie First Nation to the provincial highway network. The Webequie Supply Road would begin at Webequie Airport and then move southeast to connect east of the Buckatai River in the Ring of Fire area to the northern end of the Northern Road Link Road, which would extend south and then would connect with the Martin Falls Community Access Road west of Martin Falls, which then would extend down to connect with two upgraded roads, forestry roads, essentially resource roads, that ultimately would then connect with the provincial highway network. So in the end, what this would do is connect two remote First Nations to the provincial highway network with the potential for other future connections.
and it would also allow minerals extracted from the Ring of Fire area to be be physically connected to a market. So it would enable economic activity in the two communities and in the region as a whole by facilitating the movement of goods, services, and resources. As we always say, an all-season road is more than just the road itself. This particular road, again, would be all season with a 100-meter right-of-way. Right now, we do not have a final preferred corridor. So right now, we can say that the road could range in length between 117 and 164 kilometers. There would be numerous water crossings, as you can imagine, given the area. But one notable large bridge crossing would be that of the Attawapiskat River, which would be more than 200 meters. And then other infrastructure, or what we call ancillary infrastructure, that is either temporarily or permanently required to support the road and its operation, and its construction and or operation, would be storage and laydown areas, maintenance facilities and yards, access roads such as those to get to the pits and quarries where we would get the construction material to build the road and maintain the road with. Of course, there would be the pits and quarries or the aggregate sites where that material is mined from. And then there would be construction camps at fairly equal intervals along the road as well. As I mentioned, we only have alternative corridors. We do not have a preferred corridor yet. And when I talk about corridor, I'm talking about a 2-kilometer wide band of land within which the road would go. And so there are certain sections where we have different alternatives for segments of road going in slightly different directions. So that's why we don't have that preferred corridor yet. We're almost there. But right now there are 12 alternative corridor segments. And again, the corridor is 2 kilometers wide. This allows for some movement of the road position as new information comes forward, because we may not have all of our information. There may be certain types of information that come forward that may cause us to have to move the exact position of the road. So let's get on now and talk a bit about the socioeconomic studies in terms of the objectives. Basically simple objectives, describing the topic areas that we're going to study, the study areas or the boundaries that will be studied for each of these topics. The objectives are to guide the sort of the implementation of the process for collecting data and doing the effects assessment. These objectives are sort of a coordinated approach to make sure that we meet the requirements of both the federal and provincial government. They have regulatory requirements that are need to be met as part of this process. So this will help guide us. And then this process allows us to share information and invite feedback along the way on the study. So we would share this with Indigenous communities, the general public, government, and other interested stakeholders. So you've probably heard us talk in previous presentations about valued components. These are the things that are studied as part of an environmental or impact assessment. These are the things that are important to community members, for example. So for when it comes to socioeconomics, some of the things we would study are regional and local economy, community services and infrastructure, land use and recreation, community safety. And then now what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the indicators for each of these valued components. So I've told you now the different things we're going to study. And when I use the word indicators, these are ways of measuring impacts. Because remember, we're going through this process to identify potential effects of the project. So indicators are a way of measuring those potential effects. So for example, when we look at regional and local economy, we have things like employment. We look at employment or unemployment rates. We look at labor force participation rates, the actual number of jobs available. We might look at income, information like that, understanding the average level of income for individuals living in the communities. We would look at things like cost of living. How much does it cost on average for different things, whether it's food or fuel or transportation costs, recreational access to recreation. And looking at average spending on goods and services per household as well. Then when we look at something like community services and infrastructure, we would look at housing and accommodation. So what percentage of household income is spent on shelter costs, if that's the case. Vacancy rates, how many people might be living in each household. If we're looking at healthcare, we would look at rates of inflow and outflow of patients, average wait times for access to healthcare, percentage of the population that actually gets regular health care from a practitioner, whether it's a doctor or a nurse practitioner, and then the number of physicians that may visit, or the frequency of those physician visits as well. And then looking at something like land use and recreation, we might look at the number of households that are actually involved in outdoor activities, whether it's walking or skiing or trapping or snowmobiling, hunting, fishing, those kinds of recreational activities. Then when we look at something like community safety, we would look at crime rate, so the police reported crime rate by population, by type of crime, the incarceration rate. We would look at things like substance abuse, so proportion of the population with addiction problems, or number of people currently in treatment, rate of overdose deaths, things like that. Again, trying to get a picture of the community when it comes to socioeconomics. And then when it comes to things like methods, we would look at, we take basically what's called a mixed methods approach. So this would be where you take quantitative methods. So these are methods of measuring things, right? Of applying numbers. So looking at statistics. So when I was talking about income levels and percentage of the population doing different things. So we take that quantitative information, which allows us to look at sort of a broader number of people, and then we look at qualitative methods. What we mean by qualitative is descriptive, getting descriptive, diving in a little bit more deeply, and getting a more personal information from individuals to understand the way a situation might be, for example. The quantitative approach allows you to work at a broader scale. You look at a number of different indicators, so it can provide a lot of information. But the qualitative approach helps add to that quantitative approach because it helps us understand things in more depth. So we understand from the lived experience side of things, and understanding what community members truly are going through, and listening to their personal experiences, because that helps paint a picture for us and establish a baseline. Again, because what we're trying to do with these studies is establish a baseline, understanding the way things are now. Because without that, we don't have anything to compare to in the future. So you can't measure how well you predicted effects if you don't know the way things are now. So that's what we're trying to do. And then in terms of how baseline data will be collected, baseline data is collected from two types of sources, what we call primary sources and secondary sources. So secondary sources are not firsthand, but they come from things like studies or books or articles, work done by someone else. Primary sources are direct firsthand sources. So if we sit down with community members and conduct interviews about health, or we conduct surveys, door-to-door surveys, where we're asking information about from community members about various topics under socioeconomics. Those are primary sources. And so, quite often we'll get communities to complete surveys online, or at consultation events, at community meetings, we'll get them to fill out a survey to gather information. So again, so we can get a better picture of the way things are in the community. And then we have our own desktop analysis methods, where we look at already published social economic data from the region for the different communities. If we'll look at different studies that have been done as well too, as well as any local municipalities, if there's any organized municipalities in the area. And then we'll look at planning documents for the various projects. Other materials that are available that other communities may have done at different points in time that give us a better idea of the way things are in the community from a socioeconomic perspective. And then we do these field studies, as I talked a bit about before, these community socioeconomic surveys, the door-to-door surveys, the surveys where we are sitting down with community members one-on-one or in small groups, like focus groups. So focus groups, we've conducted these before. Well, we'll get a small group of people, sometimes of different age groups, so we can get a cross section of different age ranges, whether it's elders, people who are middle aged, and then maybe youth. And we'll talk to them and try to get an understanding of the way things are when it comes to socioeconomics. And then we'll do key information interviews. So we might talk to the director of community health services, the director of health services, to get a picture of, or maybe the head nurse at the nursing station to get a picture of how things are in the community and what goes on there, how busy they are, any limitations that they may have when it comes to resources and things like that. So lots of different ways of collecting information when it comes to these socioeconomic studies. So, wow, that was a lot to cover in a short period of time. And so that wraps up today's discussion of the socioeconomic study plan. We hope this was helpful. We hope it encourages you to join us again next week when we're going to talk about another big topic, which is the human health study. So don't forget to keep in touch with our project team via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website. Miigwech, and see you next week.